everyone, and welcome to this episode of Freedom Hub's Working Group. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host, Charles Froman. We are, as usual, sponsored by the Freedom Hub, which is the Disruptors Intersection, as you will see. We are definitely recording all of these, and we've been expanding. In fact, I didn't even get a chance, but we've added yet a fourth channel. Now we're up on Rumble, for those that are familiar with yet the new YouTube competitor that's hit the market here. And we also have some other outside sponsors too, one of which is the Heaven Sent Hemp product, which has got three really amazing programs, totally unique because it's a bioactive product, not seen anything like it. And they're giving us some very special pricing of, instead of like 5 or 10%, an actual 15% off if you make use of this code in the shopping cart. Let's take a quick detour for a minute. We do have our LinkedIn channel, as it were, so please, participate in that. Here's that Heaven Sent Hemp site, and you'll see, as I said, it's been around since the 80s, so this is not like some new thing like everybody else is. We're hubbing everything out of our main site here, which is the Marketplace for Health, Wealth, and Freedom. Today, as an example, we've put together a special page. I'm sorry, where was it here? Wow, I got myself all out of sequence here. Sorry about that. We were discussing things before everybody arrived today. So this is where it is. This is the hub. So all the information, if you're at the main site and you hover over home, you'll see information and events. This is where we're archiving and channeling all the information for these events. So here's for today. We'll use a little bit of an intro. Here's for tonight on the right. Then we have specialized links that we put together for everybody. So this is the one that some of you just automatically subscribed, so you would just know to come here because you get a notice or you just come. But for brand new people, we put up a new landing page every week for whoever that particular topic is, so we can see where they came from, for one, but also, help capitalize on that person that's talking today. Then we also are going to show you the list of who's coming up, which we'll talk about, and then also the links to all the past guests. And I said we haven't even had a chance to add the new channel, but here you can see this is an example of us up on BitChute. Here's up on Brighteon and brand new. We've only got one video, but we're up on Rumble. So things are up and moving on that front. And then most importantly, we're continuing the conversation. So after you heard, as a good example, we heard from here this fellow, Darren Brady Nelson. Well, lo and behold, I can come over here and continue the conversation with him because I really like this topic and I really want to help move that cause forward. So here's like the presentation material, and there's going to be more added to this. So there's an awful lot here brewing in the background, as you can see. So, but on that note, let's in fact shift into today. And let me go back up here. And Charles, I'm going to let you do the honors here, and we're going to give a little rundown on our guest.
For sure, Jeff, and welcome, Father Joe.
My pleasure.
We are excited to step into the fire of religion and politics. I guess the two topics you're not supposed to discuss in polite company. And for Father Grieboski, I saw him somewhere on LinkedIn about 3 or 4 months ago talking about faith and freedom, religion and politics. And then after talking to him and looking at his LinkedIn and other sites, it seems like he has been a major religious political figure for a few decades worldwide, and we'll have to ask him. But apparently, he's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, and he works at a great think tank, the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute, which was named, if the name isn't familiar, after a German religious leader who stood up to Hitler's fascism, which was not a very safe thing to do back in the 30s or 40s. But that think tank does talk about, ways that the religious can bravely face threats to society as they determine them. A couple quotes that I used for the invitation for today, I think, set the stage pretty nicely. And that is the intersection between faith and freedom. Real quick, Benjamin Franklin said you need a virtuous people to really maintain a republic. And we can think about that dynamic. And then a few decades later, the great Lord Acton, most famously known for the fact that if you're powerful, you're probably going to get corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. He said also that virtue requires liberty. So it goes both ways. If you want virtue, you got to have liberty.
Right.
I guess to allow folks to learn from the School of Hard Knocks that a virtuous life gets you ahead farther in life than all those sins that we learn against. Father Joe also has founded his own center on religion and politics, religion and justice, decades ago. And he's also a member of a separate Roman Catholic denomination that is very interesting to hear about. There are many paths to God, as many folks like to say. So let's not delay and get right into it, Jeff.
Fantastic. Well, I've got you on camera. You're good to go. Why don't you start things off a little, and then we'll start to jump to some questions.
That's great. Charles, thank you so much for that introduction. Jeff, it's a pleasure to be here today. One of the things that we need to think about when it comes to the concept of religion and politics in the United States is that it's always been an issue. It was an issue at the beginning of our founding. If you think about law, and I'm not an attorney, but from what I understand from how law works, you put the most important pieces in legislation at the beginning, and then everything flows from that. And so freedom of religion being the very first amendment and everything coming from that means that our founders took this concept very, very carefully. They took it very importantly, and they made it a centerpiece of what we were in terms of a nation. And if you think about where we were as a country, or we've become as a country, the founders looked at us and said, we don't care how religious you are. In fact, we encourage a religious nation, but we want a secular system. The system must protect the rights of all, regardless of their identity. If you want massive religious belief in a particular identity, that's fine. But that's separate from how the system works. The system separates religion and the government. And, there were arguments that the First Amendment doesn't apply to states. And then in 44, Justice Brandeis said, no, it does. The 14th Amendment applies across the country. And so, it wasn't until the 20th century that state churches started to be removed from the constitutions of U.S. states. And so when we talk about the concept of religion and politics, it's always been very much entwined. But when we think about this election, when we think about how we've moved from the founding to here, with bumps and spikes and bottoms in between, religion has never been so exploited as it has within the last, I want to say, 4 years. And a large part of that is because we've seen a shift in a particular religious worldview. And so, to give an example, Franklin Graham, when Bill Clinton was impeached, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times that said individual personal belief in God and their personal morality was an example of how they should lead, and if he lies to his family, he will lie to the country, and he shouldn't be trusted. Move us to now, and Franklin Graham's response is, well, the president's personal life is his personal life. And so we've seen this shift within certain theological worldviews that move us from one direction to another, but then raise questions about the legitimacy of those communities that are saying it. And so what we've seen in terms of the evangelical community in the United States is that demographically there are huge shifts. Younger evangelicals who previously would fall in line with their elders are now saying, wait, hold on. What you taught us and what you're saying are two very different things. And we're seeing the same thing in the Roman Catholic universe. Younger Roman Catholics are saying, hold on, Cardinal Dolan's statements at the RNC are not what we read when we read the scriptures. And so there is this internal Christian, I don't want to say civil war, that's a little bit strong, but there is a dissension where the younger believers are saying, hold on, you taught us one thing, but you're doing another. And so this whole do as I say, not as I do thing doesn't work in terms of where we live as Christians. And, you know, that doesn't just apply to Christians, by the way. The Muslim community in the United States on values are far more Republican than they are Democrat. But because of how Muslims have been treated by the Republican Party, Muslims hold their nose and they vote Democrat, which is where the Ilhan Omar universe comes from. You know, she's not a traditional Muslim in politics, but she is in faith. And so when Donald Trump goes after her in a rally and says, "How's your country?" trying to make her an image of something that's not American, what happens is religion gets exploited, as does that national identity. And so when we think about the way that religion plays, there's also another element, and that I want to get back to, which is something that I call the nuns and non-aligned. Almost 40% of the population of the United States does not identify with a religious identity. They believe, they're spiritual, but they don't want to belong to a particular community. And so you've got these people these Americans who are humanist, and then those who are spiritual, but the idea of belonging to an institution bothers them. And this is where we come back to what I said earlier about evangelicals and right-wing Catholics, where they haven't lost their faith. They've lost faith in the institution, which is a very different thing. And so now you've got these believers who want to express the social justice that they've been taught, the social justice that they understand from truly Christolic theology, and then move into, well, what does that mean in terms of how we live our lives? And when it comes to the election, neither party gets that. And so, you know, I laughed a little bit. I got an email today for evangelicals for Biden. And I laughed that'll be great. The 3 people who belong to that will show up. Yet at the same time, you know, on the Republican side, it's all focused on a particular worldview of Christianity. It's not focused on those Christians who do believe in abortion, those Christians who do believe that birth control is okay. There's a disconnect between institutional political engagement and the reality of religion in the country today. Everybody is coming from a traditional worldview, at least on the partisan levels and on the political activist levels. But those old realities don't exist anymore. Things have changed. People believe differently than they did before. There's a need, and COVID contributed to this in no small way either, because you can't go to church the way you used to. And so you have to find faith in another way. And so if you identify in a particular theological institution, you may not necessarily be able to express that. And so you'll find other ways to do it, which is in some way how our denomination works, because the majority of our denomination doesn't have churches. We have virtual communities, we have text communities, but the reality is that Americans have a new understanding of how faith works and what that means in terms of how they express it in their personal lives, in their professional lives, and in their political lives. Jeff?
That was very good. Yes, and very true. And it definitely raises some questions. So we're going to want to grab some from everybody else. But, at the top of my head, one, it seems like, like you were saying, people are potentially still spiritual. It seems like some of these either the political parties or there are some other elements that they're grabbing onto, creating like new religions, like about the weather or, whatever, kind of something to latch on to.
Yeah.
To give animation to that person's life that they can cherish and hold dear and try to promote.
Yeah. I mean, I make a distinction between spirituality, faith, and religion. Spirituality is an individual's relationship with the divine or lack thereof. Somebody doesn't have to have a relationship. Faith is a communal bonding around shared beliefs. Religion is the political institution established to protect and promote the beliefs that were created under faith. Religion is by nature a political institution. And so if we define ourselves in terms of our religion rather than in terms of our faith, we're making political decisions rather than making faith decisions. And within that, it becomes a question of, well, the Roman Catholic Church under Pope Paul VI released a papal encyclical that said contraception was a sin. But it was never made doctrine. It was a papal encyclical. One pope can override another pope on an encyclical. Yet, this has become a political question in terms of, well, Romans don't believe in contraception and therefore don't, and certainly don't believe in abortion. So as a result, we're going to fight this issue as a one-issue voter. The problem is, we don't live in a universe now where one-issue voting is acceptable. And to go one step beyond that, and I apologize, this is going to be a little controversial for some of your listeners and viewers. If your one issue is abortion, you're not pro-life. You're just anti-abortion. If you argue that a child needs to be protected but before it's born, but you don't care what happens after it's born, you're not pro-life. You're just anti-abortion. And so within that concept, it's the question of, well, if children in cages are fine with you, you're not pro-life. If you're not in favor of healthcare for anybody to get it, especially the pregnant woman who doesn't have a family or anyone to support her, you're not pro-life. If you're okay with barring people from coming into the country as refugees who are escaping violence and civil war, you're not pro-life. You are anti-abortion. And so the pro-life movement needs to stop using that term and move over to we admit it. We don't care about what happens after the baby is born. We just want to protect the baby. And that's something that has to be said and has to be dealt with, because either you are in favor of life from natural birth to natural death, as John Paul put it, or you only care about what's in the womb and don't care what happens later.
Very good. Okay, I see, David, you got your hand up.
Father Joe, how does faith-based religion relate to the following political and non-political segments? The Libertarian Party, non-faith-based citizens like myself and the free market separate from politics?
The first part of your question, David, say that again.
So how does faith-based religion, from your perspective, relate to those three political and non-political segments?
So let me answer your question this way. My denomination only takes issue on whatever was mentioned in the original 7 ecumenical councils. And so in our statement of faith, we say, we recognize abortion and euthanasia as the taking of human life. However, we recognize God's enduring mercy. When it comes to questions of like these and the ones that you bring up, our argument is it's between you and God. When it comes to the question of religion and the free market, I'm not a firm believer that religion should have a say in the free market. I don't believe that religion should have a say in the market, period. In fact, if religious believers, now let me clarify that. Religious leaders have a responsibility to make sure that the people that listen to them are telling them to make choices that are in keeping with their faith, but also in keeping with good spirit. And what I mean by good spirit is, don't be greedy. If you're going to be in the, if you're going to invest in a way that is socially responsible. Work with companies that don't fund genocide. Work with, invest in companies that take care of their employees and their shareholders. And so when we talk about the free market and religion, it becomes less of a challenge than I think a lot of people would make it, but it becomes a conversation of, are you investing in a way that is both good for you and good for the world? Does that make sense, David?
I think he's muted, Jeff. What do you think?
I unmuted myself and then I got muted. So my apologies, Father Joe.
No,
so
that's necessary.
That makes sense to me. So a concept occurs to me. You've heard of the Hippocratic Oath for the healthcare profession.
Sure.
So I suspect what you're referring to is a concept that I call the Golden Rule Oath that could apply to all other professions as well as the healthcare profession. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And look, if we had a Hippocratic Oath for finance, banking, politics, it would be a very different world. If everybody looked at the Beatitudes instead of the 10 Commandments as a model of life, as a model for life and how we live, it would be a very different universe in which all of us exist.
Very nice. Charles, I see your hand up.
Sure. Father Joe, recently the Washington Times or some newspaper said that Trump support among Catholic conservatives was rising. I think the article quoted as they saw him persevere under endless persecution. I want you to respond to that first. And then secondly, Jeff, I don't know if Jane Dolan is unmuted, but I think she might have a question about the role of abortion and the Hippocratic Oath in medicine. But go ahead on response, especially with the idea that the COVID endless hysteria and all these rumors about global pharma schemes are scaring some evangelicals that the apocalypse is here and Trump is our only hope against the deep states. His chaos is helpful. That it's a pretty large issue, I think.
No, Charles, you're absolutely right. And, you know, I'm going to take a second and back up. The very idea that any president is going to save us from any apocalyptic concept is adorable. I come from a Christian tradition that argues that our salvation comes from works and faith, and what we do matters when it's our time. If we look at what Donald Trump faces, he faces no further quote unquote persecution than any president does. He just likes to make it a thing because of his own personal issues and his own ego and personality. If you're in that office, deal with the consequences. I'm sorry. Anybody who takes a leadership role, especially at that level, has to be able to deal with what comes with it. If you can't, go back to your golden gilded room in Manhattan and stay there and don't talk to the rest of us. But to argue that you're persecuted is to forget that there's a genocide against Uyghurs in China. There's a genocide against Tibetans in China. There's a genocide against Rohingya in Burma. There was a genocide against Christians and animists in Sudan. Don't talk to me about persecution unless you know what real persecution is for what you believe and who you are. And that's one of the things that I get very angry about when it comes to the American right-wing Christian universe. They feel like, well, you hurt my feelings, therefore I'm persecuted. I'm sorry, no, you cannot say you're persecuted. Go to these places. Go to North Korea and tell me what persecution looks like. Go to South Sudan and tell me what persecution looks like. Go to China and tell me what persecution looks like. Persecution is being murdered because you believe something that the government considers a threat. You're not facing murder in the United States. You're facing uncomfortableness. Get over it and stop being a Karen.
Very cute. Shay, I see you got your hand up.
Father Joe, hi.
Hi.
So I wonder if you could discuss or compare the role of religion in politics and the role of politics on religion in other countries. Let's say Western Europe, but also we see in Eastern Europe and with the Orthodox churches,
right,
where they've basically become, or they have returned to being state religions. But are there some general trends? And is our case, I would put it this way, what about the United States makes us an exceptional situation?
It doesn't, actually, in answer to your question. So I've watched a trend continue to develop over the last 10 or 15 years of the rise of religious nationalism. And you talked about Eastern Europe. And so places like Russia, where the Russian government said, you're not Christian unless you're Orthodox, and where they have a committee within their justice ministry that reviews what is or is not an acceptable religion. Hungary, under Prime Minister Viktor Orban, deregistered all but 13 religions. And if you want to get registration back, you have to have the Minister of Justice say that you're a religion, and then you have to have a plurality, a majority, not a plurality, a majority of the parliament vote to add you back to the list. India, where Hindu nationalism has risen overwhelmingly, especially since Narendra Modi became prime minister. And so Christians, Muslims, new religious movements all face problems in India. And now we're seeing the same kind of trend develop here in the United States. And so when the current vice president talks about, we want these kinds of values, I keep telling my Catholic friends, it's not your values. It's a particular set of values that are not what you believe. And so when I think about where the world is moving in terms of religion, we're seeing an intersection, an unhealthy intersection between religion and authoritarianism, religion and autocracy, because it's safe for them. And I always laugh about this. I'll tell you a quick story. About 15 years ago, I took a delegation to Athens, Greece. And we met with the head of the Greek Orthodox Church. And he kept telling us, well, we have problems keeping our people, so we need the government to protect us. And my argument has always been, if your faith is as strong as you say it is, and your institution is doing the things it should be doing, why do you need the government to protect you? If you as an institution aren't doing what needs to be done, if you as an institution aren't taking care of the poor and the homeless and the unsheltered and all the rest, again, Christ said, you gave clothes to the naked, you gave food to the hungry, you gave water to the thirsty, you gave it to me. If you're not doing that, but you need the government to somehow step in and say, no, these are our guys, we have to protect them, there's something wrong with how you're operating. The government should never be an institution to protect religion, regardless of where you are. And it should never be an institution that protects a particular religious worldview, which is what we're seeing being moved to in the United States today.
Interesting for sure. Charles, I think I saw your hand up again.
Sure. I'll ask this question, but I thought Jane Dolan might want to ask it. Jane, you want to unmute yourself and
Sure.
ask about
Sure.
religious exemptions? Or I can. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask a different question first. Just, is there any point within a term that a woman is carrying a child that you would consider that against the principles of your religion? Or,
Look, our argument is we never want to see a woman have an abortion, ever, period. We want to make sure as a religious institution that a woman has opportunities and choices to not have to do that. We don't get into the politics of when. And so I can't answer your question in a specific way other than to say everything we do is to try and make sure that a woman never has to get to that point. Does that make sense?
To some extent it does, but earlier when you said that you can't be anti-abortion and pro-life at the same time, I just don't see why that they are incongruent in your frame of thinking.
So so let me there must have been a misunderstanding in what I said. What I'm saying is you can be pro-life and anti-abortion. And you can also be pro-choice and anti-abortion. And so what I'm arguing is that our faith recognizes that an abortion is the taking of human life. We don't say it outright, that life begins at conception, because it was never defined within the original 7 ecumenical councils. And so we don't get into the political arguments over abortion. And that also means we don't as a faith take a stand on even timelines on abortion, but we do recognize it as the taking of human life.
Just from my perspective, as a pregnancy continues, that fetus becomes more advanced throughout that pregnancy up to the point where it's born as a baby. And, some of the new legislation is proposing that right up until the point of delivery, they can inject into the woman, and basically sever the spinal cord of the baby at that point, which, I think is very extreme in my view.
So if Jeff and Charles will allow me to speak as a person rather than as a representative of an institution, I agree with you. I mean, if anything that happens, nothing should happen within the third trimester, period. We have to recognize that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And that's also included within the abortion question. And so I don't disagree with you. I'm just arguing that our denomination doesn't make political arguments about that because we haven't, there's no guidance on it in terms of the politics. But the other side of the question is, what happened in the 7 ecumenical councils was a long time ago, and they didn't expect the advances in science and the advances in technology and the advances in medicine that have occurred. But we still argue that abortion is the taking of human life, period.
But to me, I think it goes beyond political because now we're looking at a humanistic view of something that's happening. And I mean, even as I become more educated, I see that, I've seen videos where they show, even at earlier stages, where they can show these abortions happening, that the baby on ultrasound is grimacing and crying and screaming and trying to move away from the instrument. So I just think that, sometimes if you're backed by a religion sanctioning something, it gives people more latitude to do things that are inhumane.
Yes. I'm not arguing that we are endorsing anything. We're not. What we are saying is we don't know everything. And so when a woman makes a choice, it is very much an argument, a conversation, a crying between her and her God. We don't take positions on this, and as a result, we may be seen as being ambivalent, but it doesn't mean that we don't care, and it doesn't mean that we don't want that woman to not have to make that choice or for that baby to have to die. And so, I can't give you an answer that's going to make anybody happy. I'm not going to give you an answer that's going to make me happy. I can only tell you where we are and where I am. Does that make sense, Jane?
It does. I guess it just saddens me that in my lifetime, I see more of a callousness to how people value life and to what the sanctity of life is.
Oh, no, don't get me wrong. I fully agree with you, by the way, because the one of the things that frustrates me so much, it frustrated me as an activist, it frustrates me as an activist priest, is that no one actually understands the value and dignity of human life. And we get into this in whether it's the abortion question, whether it's Syria, whether it's the Uyghurs, whether it's the Rohingya, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's domestic violence. The concept of human dignity is lost on many of us, and we have to come back to this. And I know that my friends on the right will argue, well, let's bring religion back and that'll solve it. No, that doesn't solve it. What solves it is understanding that every single human person has dignity and deserves respect, period. Dignity and respect, period.
Well, thank you.
You really never really know you've got, just real cool and quick second, Jane, because look at some people that come from these like horrible countries, as it were, come here and then they invent all these amazing things. So every person's you never know anyone on the whole planet, what's inside that person if you never let them have that opportunity.
That's right.
And abortion's like probably one of the saddest sides of that aspect of, like you said, Jane, because who knows what we just lost when that happened.
Well, Jeff, if you let me interject for just a second, I'm going to tell a personal story to your listeners. I was adopted. I was born not long after Roe v. Wade was passed. My birth mother, her mother, wanted her to have an abortion. My birth mother said no. He deserves to live. Or, I mean, she didn't know it was he, but the baby deserves to live. My birth mother knew that she couldn't take care of me, that she couldn't give me the life that she wanted to give me, so she made the choice to put me up for adoption. But, I was on that spectrum where I could very well have not existed. And yeah, that's something that I think about constantly in terms of how I live my life, that I could not necessarily have had the life that I have, or do what I do, or contribute what I contribute, because a 14-year-old girl got pregnant and made a choice that to this day I think is impossible for a 14-year-old girl to make.
Yeah.
And so God bless her for it.
Absolutely. I mean, you see that Kanye West has been in that same jag of late, that
Yeah.
he potentially could have been aborted, and look what he had done, type of thing. Jane, you want to finish your point?
Yeah, actually, I was going to pivot to a different point, if that's okay.
Please do.
Yeah, so some of the vaccines are made from aborted fetal cells, and some people feel that goes against their religious belief system. Where do you stand on supporting people who have that belief system?
I'm gonna come down, like I said before. I'm not gonna, as a representative of the Old Catholic Church, I will not take a position on what anybody wants to believe. If you have issues with it, great. Stand up, argue it, fight it, go to the courts, do what you got to do. If you believe it's okay, then also stand up, argue it, go to the courts. I'm not gonna take a position on that theologically, because one, I'm not theologically competent to do so, but two, again, from the tradition from which I come, this is all about an individual and their relationship with God. So if you don't support it, great. If you do support it, great. Do what you got to do. It's between you and God. And honestly, bear with me for a second. I am gonna go down a theological road. I'm a firm believer that when we die, we're gonna stand before the Lord, and the Lord's gonna look at us and say, "Did you learn how to love?" It's the only question he's going to ask us. And then we're going to have to prove to him that we knew what love was. And whether or not we can answer that question with honesty, with faith, with strength, with complete openness, that's our answer. Did you know how to love? And that's going to be the thing. And honestly, Jane, that's where it comes on terms of abortion, on terms of all the rest of this. Did you learn how to love? Do you know how to love? And did you apply it? Period.
Well, thank you for that.
Thank you, Jane.
It was good. David?
Father Joe, echoing one thing that you said, I am both pro-choice and pro-life, in that order, in the legal sense, in a personal sense, perhaps in a different order. Along those lines, do you feel that a faith-based religion is a precondition for a solid moral foundation, particularly as applied in politics, or more importantly, in economic or social free markets?
David, your questions are fabulous, and because they always make me they've made me think during this. And here's what I'm going to say in response. I like that you say faith-based religion, because that presupposes there are religions that are not faith-based, which I like, by the way. I will admit this, and all of you will hang up on me. I'm a huge fan of the Satanic Temple. These guys do great work in advancing freedom of religion in the United States. They're not a faith-based religion. They don't worship Satan. They have absolutely no theological worldview or concept or anything. What they do have is a concept of civil rights and human rights. When it comes to how we advance these concepts or these conversations, religion is often painted in a bad way, rightfully so, because religion, again, I talked about this earlier, the difference between spirituality, faith, and religion. Religion is a political institution. It's not about God. It's about politics. And those politics are involved in every conversation that are engaged with those institutions. So, David, give me the issues that you talked about again.
So specifically, how a solid moral foundation, as applied in politics, and more importantly in economic and social free markets.
I'm a firm believer, and I may get excommunicated for this, so thanks, Charles and Jeff. But I'm a firm believer that you don't need a religious entity to tell you morality. I actually believe human nature is positive from birth. And we already have, when we're born, the concept of what is positive moral worldview. We don't need religion to tell us what is right and wrong. Religion doesn't do that, and nor should it, by the way. Religion should be the mechanism that helps us find salvation, not the mechanism that helps us find the good and the bad. If we can't find good and bad on our own, there's a bigger problem in society and in parenting and in how how we exist. Religion should not give us moral guidance. That's not a religion's job. A religion's job is to to put us on the road to salvation. Does that make sense, David?
Yes, it does. It's amazing how closely we are aligned along those topics. Are you familiar with the Tom Clancy novels?
Yes, of course.
So I particularly enjoy how religion is handled, generally from a Catholic perspective, but very broad-based.
Well, I've always laughed at the fact that he thought the solution to the Middle East peace process was turning the Jerusalem over to the Vatican, and that the Swiss Guards protect it with the support of Navy SEALs.
Fantastic novel series.
Yeah.
Very good. Charles, I see you popped your hand there.
Yes. So, Father Joe, I mentioned in the intro you had some Nobel Peace recommendations. Tell us about those recommendations. What did you do that was so good that put you on the pedestal?
Well, ever since Al Gore got it, I pretty much have said that the Nobel Peace Prize doesn't have the weight that everybody says it does. Well, and the fact that I got nominated for it, but yeah, Charles, thanks. I was nominated 3 times, and my organization was nominated 3 times for the Peace Prize for the work we did on parliamentary diplomacy. And so when I ran the Institute on Religion and Public Policy, our biggest program was the Interparliamentary Conference on Human Rights and Religious Freedom. And we brought parliamentarians together from dozens and dozens and dozens of countries. And so we had the Chinese parliament and the Tibetan parliament. We had North Sudan and we had South Sudan. We had Israel and Palestine. And so our work was recognized on using legislators as a way to build peace and to build build peace. That's a whole other show we can do, but to at least build conversations and to build relationships.
Yeah, and that's key to getting anywhere, is getting some relationship underway. That's really cool.
Right.
Real quick, Jeff.
Yeah,
Joe,
did you ever join?
give us a minute on the Middle East piece. You've been involved with. You mentioned Jerusalem. You've been involved there in the West Bank.
Yeah.
Real quick, can you give us an elevator pitch? What can be done there?
I'm
running out of time, so.
Yeah, sure. Let me give you a quick elevator pitch. The recent agreements that have been signed between Israel and states in the Gulf are lovely, but they're not relevant. These are not countries that have ever been at war. What the only thing they do is undermine the Palestinians. And the Palestinians the Palestinian Authority is currently president of the Arab League presidency. They gave it up because, these kinds of agreements basically say, yeah, you're adorable. That's fabulous. And by the way, this is not a new thing. Nobody in the Arab world, or frankly, for that matter, in the Muslim world, really cared about the Palestinians. The Palestinians were an excuse. What the Trump administration has done is given Israel and the Arab states an excuse to make trade agreements. It's all about money. It's not about peace. It's not about security. It's not about any of that. These are countries that weren't at war at all. Nothing's going to change. These aren't, there's no shift whatsoever. But thanks to COVID and thanks to the recent explosion in Beirut, the Christian community suffers. The Yazidi community suffers, and all of the other religious minorities suffer. And so there's, we talk about the good that comes of it, but nobody's been talking about the bad, and nobody's talking about where the suffering still continues, despite the fact that the UAE is now going to get 17 fighters for signing this agreement. But where's the money going to go into Gaza and the West Bank? There's nothing there. No one's talking about it. There's no additional funding. It's all, everything is on the back of the Palestinians.
And where can folks follow you?
On Twitter, I'm at Grieboski, Grieboski. I am on LinkedIn. And you guys have given my LinkedIn link. So if there are further questions, if anybody wants to follow up or yell at me, I am absolutely available.
Very good. We're going to continue the conversation as we were discussing. We're going to get you up and running over on this area after the show here, ultimately. And again, you're going to want to come back here to follow up on this recording. This will be released over the weekend, so it'll be up there for next week at these various links, including our little news slot. So I want to definitely tell you thanks for being here today.
But Jeff, it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.